Good morning, friends, and welcome to our Saturday. No, it's not Saturday, it's Monday, and welcome to our Monday class that we hold each week. And if you noticed at the beginning, I wanted to talk about a topic that we've covered a little bit over the weeks that we've been doing these months, we've been doing these talks. That's the topic of karma, but I'd like to go into it, certain aspects of it a little bit more deeply today. And it's in response to a question that was submitted to me that I will come to later, the question to it. And so it's from that perspective that I'd like to address today's topic. I think one of the reasons, of course, I want to address this is because there's oftentimes a bit of a
Jayant ji,
misunderstanding.
if you
Should
could
I do?
talk a little louder, it would be awesome.
Okay, you want me to do a little bit louder? Maybe that setting we changed, what didn't work so well. But I'll have to come closer to the microphone then. Okay, how is that, Bara? Is that better?
It's better, thank you.
Okay, good. Um, Actually, I have next time maybe I'll try this very fancy microphone they have here in the studio here, and I'll try that next time. Uh, this topic of this topic of karma sometimes is very misunderstood, and actually I wouldn't say so much misunderstood, it's little understood, because karma, as Swami Sri Yukteswar was saying in the chapter in the autobiography of a yogi when he was speaking about uh, law of miracles, astrology, bangles. He was saying only wise men, those you could say who are self realized, can truly look at the stars and see a scroll. In other words, to be able to foresee and read one's karma, one's karmic background, perhaps what's in store for another person in the future, or for looking at oneself even to be able to understand one's karma. Whereas he says most people, they look at the stars and they don't see a scroll. Instead, they see what's he called a scrawl, and just a confusion. And so it actually is quite a complex topic. And none of us, unless we have reached that state of self realization, can truly understand all the ins and outs of karma. But there are some principles that I think it's good for us as beginners in the study of karma might want to consider. And it must be understood that karma is simply the application in a certain way of the basic principle of Newtonian physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And this principle of action and reaction, you see it applies in the general physical nature of this world, the evolution of planets and gases and galaxies. There's a constant action reaction that seems to us to be somewhat inanimate and totally, although we know from what the masters tell us that there is no such thing as unconsciousness, that consciousness exists in everything, even in matter. But, and there's even, you could say, awareness on some very primal level, even in matter, but it's not self awareness for sure. And it proceeds along a natural evolutionary path, a natural order of action and reaction. And on that level, you could say that it's predictable. There's a certain prediction that you can look into it if you know all of the factors, uh, which may or may not be possible. But if you know all the factors, perhaps you could predict what's going to happen. Well, that applies until what we finally begin to realize that yes, there is awareness, there's consciousness in matter, and that consciousness begins to express. Evolution takes place, and you could say that it's consciousness, it sleeps in the physical matter, and but then it begins to awaken as life forms begin to evolve, and in plants and animals, awareness is there, but there's very little self-awareness until you reach that state of mankind. And this is what really makes mankind, the human condition, very unique and very special, is that it has that ability within us the soul awakens to a point of self-awareness. It's not just aware. The lion and the tiger are aware, but are they self-aware? In mankind, we have this self-awareness. And when we get to the position of self-awareness, that evolutionary status of that, this is when the ego begins to develop, because the ego is, you might say, latent in lower forms, but it takes expression, fully expresses in mankind. And within human form, and this ego begins to develop, you have this sense of in other words, it's not just purely reaction, action, and reaction on the human level. On the material level, that's true. But when you have, as Swamiji defined it when in karma, he gave a very nice, interesting definition of it. He says, any action, thought, or deed that proceeds from a coherent center of attention will attract consequences back to that center. And when we're speaking on the human level, this is where we come into the world of karma. That special application of this law of action and reaction, Newtonian physics. And let me repeat that again. Any action, thought, or deed that proceeds from a coherent center of attention. And what is that center of attention in the human form? That center of attention is ego consciousness, that self-awareness, that concentration on that identification with ourselves, with this body. That ego consciousness awakens in the human form into a much more developed and refined sense. And that center of attention upon ourselves creates karma, and it attracts consequences back to itself. And so karma really doesn't apply. It does. There is karma, but it's on a very mechanical level on lower life forms. But it becomes very complex and very individualized when we're on the level of having this coherent center of attention, which let's call the ego. And we begin to then get into a very complex situation of karmic action and reaction. But the thing to remember here is that we can't avoid this karma. We can't go backwards. I mean, we think we could, and perhaps in our evolutionary journey, we can slip back for a little bit of time, but eventually we are impelled by our very nature to expand that ego consciousness and refine that ego consciousness, let's say it that way, and to expand that consciousness until ultimately we transcend ego consciousness and we realize that this little coherent center of ego, we break the bounds of that and begin to identify, instead of with the little self, with the little s, we expand it, and the escape from that boundary is to expand it to identify with the larger self, capital S, of self-realization, self-awareness, the self of the larger potential of who and what we really are, that divine self. And so this is the direction we go. And the journey is one of not, our first priority is not to overcome our karma. It's to be, is to transcend the ego. Karma is, you might say, just, and some people approach the spiritual path and they think, well, I've got to get rid of all my karma. I've got to neutralize all of that karma, which is true, but it's not the first thing that is necessary. The first thing is to transcend the ego, which is creating that karma in the first place. And then once that ego has been transcended, then we can perhaps begin to neutralize that karma. And so consequently, this preface is to the question that was submitted to me, and the person who was submitted the question referred to something that Swami Kriyananda wrote. And he wrote a quote, and I'm going to read the quote. A Jivan Mukta still has all his carnations of past karma to work out. Only from his state of inner freedom can that karma be dissipated. He himself remains untouched by the karma. So the key part of that question is the Jivan Mukta, which is one who has attained the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, is no longer identified with ego consciousness, with this body, this limitation, but is instead identified with the cosmic consciousness, has that, but still resides within this body as an instrument. A Jivan Mukta still has all his carnations of past karma to work out. Then Swami says, only from that state of inner freedom can that karma be dissipated. Now, the question came up. He says, well, if that's the case, won't Kriya help me to dissipate that karma from the past? Isn't that what Kriya does? And do I have to reach a state of Jivan Mukta before I can get that inner freedom? Isn't karma Kriya going to do exactly that, to dissipate it? Where it seems like Swami is saying, no, only in that state of inner freedom of Nirvikalpa Samadhi can we dissipate that past karma. And I thought it was a very interesting question. And I don't think there's a conflict there. I think it's a lack of interpretation and understanding of language. And now I hope this isn't too subtle, but because oftentimes we approach Kriya with things, I'm going to burn up all my karma through the practice of Kriya. All these seeds of karma that are within me, through the practice of my Kriya, I'll be able to burn those seeds up. And in the process, I'll be able to attain this state of freedom. Well, yes and no. And this is why it becomes subtle. I think the word burning karma is a little bit, it invokes a little bit of a false image that somehow those things that we have put into motion from the past, they're gone if we burn them up, and that somehow the karma, that impulse that has been put into motion, is no longer going to be there. But that is not true. There's a cosmic law that karmic consequences are inevitable. In other words, if I swing the pendulum in that direction, that pendulum is going to come back. That's an inevitability. That's built into the cosmic law, and that's part of karma as well. But we have to understand that that is going to happen, but there are other forces also at play. And that we can, it's the important point for us as a spiritual devotee, and what we do through the practice of Kriya, with the spiritual path, with the assumption of a guru into our spiritual life, we change the way that we receive it. That reception of that karma is modified. And this is what our job is on the spiritual path. The spiritual path is not, you might say, eliminating those karmic forces that have been put into motion. It's removing the ego consciousness that is there to receive it. And how we receive and how we respond to karma is what's in our control. That which has been put into motion is really not in our control anymore. It's like we take an arrow and we shoot the arrow. That arrow is gone, and that arrow is going to ultimately find resolution by coming back to us. But how it comes back to us and what is there to receive that arrow when it comes back, that is what we have influence over. Now, when we speak about this, there are two types of karma that we might want to address. And you could say karma, and we often talk about karma as the seeds of karma within the spine, or vrittis, or whirlpools of consciousness. Think of it in this way, as maybe as also tendencies and things that we have put into motion in the past, desires. So we have desires. Now these desires haven't yet been put into action, you see, they're just potentials. When we have a desire for something, we're locking up some potential energy that is seeking expression outward. And eventually, as Master said, eventually all desires must be fulfilled in one way or the other. And then Swamiji asked him, well, even a desire for an ice cream cone? He said, oh, yes, that desire is there, so that desire must be fulfilled. Now, I think fulfilled may be not quite the right word. It must be resolved, is a way to put it. Now, I think a good example for this is a story that Swami Shri Yukteswar, from his life and his disciple, which I told this story a few weeks ago in some previous class, where he had one of his disciples had a karmic desire. He had a desire, a karmic impulse to be married and to find, his soulmate maybe, or whatever that perfect love in a worldly sense he was seeking. But he wanted also very deeply to be a yogi and to be a disciple. And he was a disciple of Swami Shri Yukteswar. And so Shri Yukteswarji recognized this, and one day they went to the train station to get on a train to go somewhere, and they took a seat, and Swami Shri Yukteswar tapped the disciple, says, look there. And in the train that was parked next to their train, was in the seat adjacent to the disciple, there was sitting a young woman there. And the disciple looked at the woman and in a sense had a soul recognition of this young lady. And she was, you could say she was the epitome, or maybe the incarnation even, of all of his deep soulmate longings. And he looked at her, and just in that glance of seeing her, his soul, that longing that he had for that relationship, human relationship, was resolved. And then that train went, or their train went, and he never saw her again. And I'm sure this took place because of the Guru's grace. You see, the Guru had influenced him to the point where he could resolve that karma just through that glance of that woman sitting next to him. And so you could say it's the resolution of the desire that needs to take place. Now that can take place through the actual happening of that, which is typically if we don't have an inner spiritual life, if we're just working on very much the material plane, that has to be resolved outwardly. But subtly within inside, it's really the inner desire that needs to be resolved. That vortex of committed energy, that vritti, that is deposited somewhere deep in the astral spine, that is waiting for certain circumstances to arise. And that may never happen. Circumstances may never be propitious in this lifetime for that to happen. But in this case, through the influence of the Guru, they were brought to bear, and he was able to resolve that. And so this is one way we can resolve. And Kriya helps us to resolve those, because we have within us all of these very deep-seated desires. And as we raise our consciousness, we draw the magnetism of ourself, we draw the magnetism of the Guru to ourselves, our consciousness changes. And as our consciousness uplifts, we can begin to resolve those locked up energies that are committed to desires from the past. And this is the way that it's said that Swami was saying in that quote that I gave, that when we reach the state of Jivan Mukta, we can actually go back in time to look at past lifetimes, the ones that we're not even aware of on the conscious level in this lifetime, but they're there. They're there, those desires, those locked up desires from the past, who knows what they are and how many. We can go back in time, and he says we can even, one meditation as from Jivan Mukta in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, can go back into a lifetime and resolve those vrittis, those desires. It doesn't have to be resolved outwardly, but those commitments of energy can be resolved. And so in a sense, now we say burned, but I don't think that's really burning them, other than in the sense that we're untying them and offering them up into the divine consciousness. So in that sense, they're an offering like a fire ceremony. So in a sense, their offering and burn is appropriate for that. But in the meantime, we're untying those knots, karmic knots. Now that's one type. This other type is of karma is things we have done in the past. In other words, those arrows that we have shot, put things into motion that are going to influence our future. And we've pushed the pendulum, you could say, and we're waiting for the pendulum to come back, and maybe it's going to knock us over. Those as well. Now, we don't stop the pendulum. What we do is by raising our consciousness through who and what we are, when that pendulum comes back, that I, that Nayaswami Jaya, that put that in motion in some past lifetime perhaps, or in this lifetime even, he's no longer there. I have changed. I've become a different Nayaswami Jaya. And so when it comes back, it may still come back and tap this body or this circumstance that is my life, but it's not going to really affect me in the same way. I am a different person inwardly, you see. But of course, I have the inner self, but I also have this outer self, this instrument that I have to carry with me. And so it may hit this, but I'll be a very different person. So in this way, we escape, you could say. We take the escape tunnel out of the house of lack, and we're not burned up, and so we escape. So this is what Kriya does for us. When we practice Kriya, we are one, resolving those old issues and desires in an inner way, that we fulfill them, but inwardly fulfill them and we change our consciousness in such a way that when those things come back to us, they come back to us in a way that, what was that all about? And the way Swami Kriyananda put it, he says, what seems to be an obstacle, you find that it turns into an opportunity for something. And so consequently, this is why Swami, and again, I've told this a number of times, astrologers would tell him, looking at his chart, oh, you have a terrible chart. It's a terrible astrological future. Poor guy, you're going to suffer from this and that obstacle. You got so many obstacles in your life. And then Swami said, they'd tell him that, and he would introspect. He says, what obstacles? What are they talking about? Because he didn't see them as obstacles. But then people who knew him say, well, look you did that, and that happened, and that happened. And he'd say, well, I guess you're right. I guess those were obstacles. But he did not see them as an obstacle. You see, he changed. It changes us. By practicing Kriya, we loosen the bonds of ego identity because we're not identified. So, and this is how we protect ourselves. Now, this is not the only way we protect ourselves, but leaving these other forces I'm going to mention out of the picture, this is how we change. We are not the same person. And thereby, but that karma still is going to come back. But we don't see it in the same way as when it left. When we shot that arrow out, it's coming back looking for the old Nayaswami Jaya, and it can't find him. But it still comes back, and I see it as, I'm looking at it, and a different Nayaswami Jaya interprets it to be something different. And so we protect ourselves. But you could also say there's other elements involved here. This is what Master says in the autobiography of a yogi. It's like we can dissipate when that comes back. You could say if a blow is coming to strike us really hard, if we put it between ourselves and that blow, many pillows, you might say. Let's see that, it's coming to hit us, and instead it hits the pillow, and we just feel a little nudge because the pillow absorbed that. Well, they're never this. It absorbed the blow, or perhaps even they came back and it kind of deflected it around us a little bit. Well, that's the guru. The guru's grace. We put ourselves in tune with the larger vibration. And Master, of course, said there are also mechanical ways to do that, and this is the science of bangles and gems and things like that. It's like putting up a lightning rod on your house. That lightning still hits the house. If you ever seen pictures of how this is the lightning will come and hit the house, but it flows right through the house or around the house, down the side of the house, through that lightning rod into the ground and is absorbed in the ground. And that's the case with karma. Now remember, karma is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's a force. So consequently, good karma too is it doesn't affect us personally. It affects the environment and goes into the ground and is shared. Good karma is shared by the ground and by the environment, immediate environment around us, because that house is not me. It's this body. It's this personality. That's the house. And so consequently, it just, might say moving around me. It's not who I really am. So consequently, this is why we attune ourselves with something larger than our little self. And of course, the Guru's grace comes into this, and this is why we attune ourselves with the Guru's presence, and it acts like that rod around us. Or if we're using our own will, we strengthen our aura, but the way we strengthen that is to build up to change. And this is what Kriya does for us. It changes our consciousness. And so our challenge is to receive karma in a positive manner. And this is what we're doing every day. And this is the spiritual path. The spiritual path is walking the path of life and learning the lessons to be able to receive that which is going to come to us, to receive it in a positive way. Not so much to dodge what's coming to us, although you can deflect it a little bit, but is to be able, how do we respond? And this is neutralizing the reactive process, to turn challenges into opportunities, to train ourselves in small things that are happening to us, so that when larger things come, we learn that our natural response to life is not to be reactive to it and to resist it, but it's to go with it, to face disaster with positive courage, and to defeat depression with joy, to turn what would normally be called misfortune into something good. And we have to use our will and our affirmative powers to do this. It's not going to come, at first just naturally, but if we practice and we affirm, it starts to become natural. And the key to it, of course, is how do you do this? It's just not by positive thinking alone. The key is, of course, is to develop those right attitudes, responsiveness, and that all of the things that spirituality and practice of Kriya will inculcate within us. But the key is to see God's hand and see God at play in everything. And when we have that, whatever happens to ourselves, we're untouched inwardly by this. But it's not all or nothing. This is a gradual progression. And we have to accept the fact, if we're humans, in the humankind, we're walking toward divine freedom, we have to accept the fact that we will be tested. Obstacles will be there. But remember, obstacles, you could also say that sentence by saying, yes, I accept obstacles. That's life. But it's also challenges are there. We could say it as opportunities are there. Opportunities to make myself more perfect, perfect myself, opportunities to get rid of the carbuncles that are on my personality, opportunities to experience greater joy by releasing them. If we can just turn it around, and if we choose to do this, and you could say we're setting ourselves to be accepting the fact that we're going to be tested, but you don't have to invite difficult things. I know, Swami Devrishi, who's in charge of our Korean embassy. He's the only man I know, or woman, the only person I know that has been actually struck by lightning more than once in his lifetime. I don't know if it's 2 times or 3 times, but he certainly didn't invite that. But yet, some sort of strange karma. He was actually been hit by lightning, and in a sense, he's been spared any adverse effects from it. You don't consciously go through life saying, God, Divine Mother, strike me with lightning. That would be foolish. But you say, God, whatever comes, let it come, and you be with me. I put my trust in you. And then you see, whatever does come, it comes of its own self. And God knows. And so pray for God's guiding hand, pray for God's presence, pray for God's company, and pray for the strength to accept positively whatever comes to you. Circumstances are always neutral. They are what they are. This is what Master said. There's not bad karma or good karma. It's just how we take it. And if we can attain this state of mind, and ultimately we see everything, it's just God's gift to us, God's will to us. And there's this saying that death, where is thy sting? We get to that point and you say, bad, circumstances, where is your sting? Nothing can affect us if we live in that vibration. And this is what we're doing when we practice Kriya, because Kriya gives us some practical tools, day by day by day, strengthening yourself to be able to not to get rid of that karma, but to, you could say, transcend it. Not to get rid of the ego, but to transcend it, to offer it up. Say, here it is. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to give it up to you, God, and let you use this vehicle as you wish in your service. So there is no more I and thy. We unite our consciousness with that higher self. So let's approach the physical or the spiritual life in that attitude. Let's practice Kriya, and it gives with the tools Master's given us, and through our practice and through our approach to life in this way, we attune ourselves with Guru. And then when we have that, we'll be free in time. And or maybe I should say it, we'll be free right now if we do that perfectly. And this is what our goal is in this lifetime, as Swami Kriyananda exhorted all of us. He says, be Jivan Mukta in this lifetime. Once we have that, then we can look back at all those karmic obstacles, all those karmic entanglements, commitments, energy, and we can work them out, but we'll have reached that point where we're not creating new entanglements. And I think that's where we want to be. And then whether it takes us a lifetime or 1,000 lifetimes, what does it matter once we reach that point of consciousness? So God bless all of you, and I look forward to seeing you again next Monday. So joy to you during this week. And I'm not going to take questions this week, but if you have some next week, you can chat. You can put them in the chat box, and I'll try to address them next week. Joy to you. Bye-bye.